Evening, and thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to this very special session on what's next for Neighbourhood First. It's a great honor and pleasure to welcome Mr. Harshwat Shringla, Foreign Secretary, Government of India. In the course of a diplomatic career spanning over 36 years, Foreign Secretary Shringla has held a variety of positions abroad and in New Delhi. He has served as India's ambassador to the United States of America and the Kingdom of Thailand, was the High Commissioner to Bangladesh, and during his various stints at the Ministry of External Affairs, Mr. Shringla has headed the Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, and Maldives desk, the United Nations Political Division, and the SARC Division. Mr. Shringla, thank you so much for addressing us on this very important subject of India's neighborhood. Your leadership and guidance to us at Ananta over the last several years has been invaluable. We truly appreciate your support and partnership for the India-US Forum, our various Track 2 dialogues, and all our foreign policy programs. And we look forward to our continued partnership with you and the Ministry of External Affairs. I'm also delighted to welcome Mr. Jamshed Godrej, who will be chairing the session today. Mr. Godrej is the chairman of the board of Godrej and Boyce Manufacturing Company Limited. He is the chairperson of the board of directors of Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation, India Resources Trust, Council on Energy, Environment and Water. He is director of World Resources Institute, USA. Mr. Godrej is also the past president of the Confederation of Indian Industry and IMTMA, the Indian Machine Tool Manufacturers Association. Thank you, Mr. Godrej. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. Some housekeeping rules before we start the session. We will begin the session with a brief address by the Foreign Secretary. This will be followed by a conversation between the Secretary and Mr. Godrej, and then we will open it up for questions to the audience. Instructions for the audience: please send in your questions throughout the session and do not wait until the end. We will be taking up your questions during the Q&A session. If you're watching this session on Zoom, please use the Q&A portal at the bottom of your screen. And if you're on Facebook, please write your questions in the comment section. May I now hand over the proceedings to Mr. Godrej to take this conversation forward. Thank you. Thank you both, Mr. Secretary and Mr. Godrej.
Thank you, Kiran, and a very good evening to everyone. And thank you for joining us. Let me start by thanking our guest of honor, Mr. Harshvardhan Shringla, for taking the time to be with us this evening. As Kiran mentioned, we at the Ananta Center deeply appreciate the support and encouragement we have received from you and the Ministry of External Affairs for our work. Mr. Shringla, we are delighted to have you with us today, and thank you very much for addressing this timely session. Neighbors are important, and building strong relationships is crucial to the foreign policy of any nation. India, on its part, is uniquely placed in a complex region, which has immense potential for growth, but still remains the least integrated in the rest of the world. Despite their shared civilization ties, cultural heritage and values, religious and linguistic affinities, history shows many ups and downs in the manner in which countries in South Asia have dealt with each other. Irrespective of these stressing circumstances, India, being the largest country in the region, has to reach out and give more than it receives. And this has been our approach, especially towards our neighbors, under the saath, sabka, vikas motto. But strategic concerns in the region continue to hamper prosperity. There are other influences in the region which disturb the balance, and this is a reality. In addition, the challenges of cross-border terrorism, rivalry across our maritime periphery, growth of illegal migration, the declining democratic ideals continue to affect peace and security of the neighborhood. In this complex neighborhood and environment, we seek the Foreign Secretary's thoughts on how India is approaching the challenges of its neighborhood. And do you, sir, see any silver linings going forward? That's a broad question, and I'm sure that there are plenty of silver linings, but also clouds from time to time. May I now request the Foreign Secretary, Mr. Shringla, to address us.
Namaste and good evening. Let me begin by thanking the Ananta Aspen Center for inviting me to speak today on India's Neighbourhood First policy. The Ananta Aspen Center has established itself in the policy and international affairs space. Kiran just mentioned a number of programs that the Ministry of External Affairs hosts jointly with the Ananta Center, including the India-US Forum. And it is a pleasure to be a part of this conversation today on our neighborhood. I want to thank Mr. Jamshed Godrej for presiding over today's talk and providing that very valuable perspective at the beginning of this session. And of course, my very grateful thanks to our very good friend, very able, in many senses, interlocutor, Kiran Pasricha, who's right here with us. And not only for initiating this proposal and idea to have this session on the neighborhood, but also taking it forward to its logical conclusion today. On the neighborhood, of course, it's often been said that geography is destiny. India's destiny is inextricably linked to its neighbors. Our countries in the neighborhood are unique and they have special significance for us, both because they are deeply interconnected with us through ties of geography, culture, and history, but also because the internal and external dimensions of our policy and theirs intersect and overlap with each other. Relations with them also impact on our states that border these countries. And as a result, our neighborhood remains our primary diplomatic arena. It is first and foremost amongst our foreign policy priorities. The primacy given to our neighborhood in our diplomatic efforts is reflected in our Neighbourhood First policy, which is a central pillar of India's foreign and security policies and has been so since 2014. The notice that the Ananta Aspen Center circulated for today's event mentions two data points. The first is the unprecedented invitation issued to our neighboring heads of state and government in 2014 to attend the swearing-in ceremony of Prime Minister Shri Narendra Modi's first government. The second refers to our neighbors being first in the recipient list of Vaccine Maitri, which is our Indian manufactured vaccines. And both of these, I think, have their own story to tell. And as I go along, I'll try and bring it into the narrative. Since 2014, of course, much water has flown under the bridge, both in real terms and metaphorically. I mean, the Ganga flows into the Padma, and of course, the Brahmaputra also flows in the same manner. And we are all interlinked through our rivers in our neighborhoods, primarily, if not rivers, then at least our seas. And in all of this, the Prime Minister's vision, and Mr. Godrej mentioned it, sabka saath, sabka vikas, sabka vishwas, has encompassed our neighborhood. Our immediate neighborhood is really, in many senses, an informal part of that vision. And sometimes very tangibly, sometimes less so. India interacts with its neighbors frequently at more levels, including the highest levels, than it does so with all of its other partners. And we do so in a constructive and open spirit. We are today better connected. We are buying and selling more from each other. We visit each other in larger numbers, using better physical connections than existed before. I mean, this is just a statement. I will, of course, qualify it. If you look at our development partnership, and a lot of emphasis in our neighborhood is given to our working with our neighbors to jointly develop both their economies and their capacities in many ways. India's lines of credit to its neighbors have jumped from about 3.2 billion in 2014 to about 15 billion in 2020. And that, if you look at it, is quite a significant jump, more than fourfold jump in terms of our assistance, concessional loans extended to our immediate neighbors. In addition, of course, we are undertaking a number of quick gestation, quick impact projects in these countries, which is aimed at benefiting communities directly. I myself, as ambassador to Bangladesh, have experienced the impact of these quick gestation projects in neighborhoods all over the country. And you know, when we talk about lines of credit, these are large infrastructure projects. They take you know, their own time in reaching a certain level of fruition because of the large scale of the projects. But quick impact projects, you know, show results sometimes within 6 months, but within a year or two, you can see that difference on the ground, whether it's community centers, whether it is, you know, rest houses, whether it is, you know, renovation of schools, whatever it is, these are very, very high impact, high visibility projects. Trade with our neighbors, with Afghanistan, Bhutan, Bangladesh, the Maldives, Myanmar, etc., increased from about $20 billion in 2014 to about $27 billion in 2020. So in the last 6 years, we've seen about a 30% increase in bilateral trade with our immediate neighbors. The potential, of course, is much greater, but what we are seeing is real progress on the ground. And these increases have contributed to and have benefited from significantly enhanced connectivity and improved border infrastructure. As we go along, I will elaborate on what really this means. I spoke about Vaccine Maitri, the supply or the export of Indian manufactured vaccines to our neighborhood. This is always predicated on the vision of the Prime Minister to provide affordable, accessible, Indian-made vaccines to all of humanity. But I mean, we start with our own neighbors, and that's where I think the impact is most visible. As we are aware, our national rollout began on the 16th of January this year. By the 20th of January, we had started supplying these vaccines to our neighbors. The first tranche of Indian vaccines landed in Bhutan and Maldives on the 20th. On the 21st, we had our supplies to Bangladesh and Nepal. And on the 22nd, Myanmar and Seychelles received their vaccines. And within the first week or 10 days, all of our neighbors and our extended neighborhood had also received vaccines, Indian manufactured vaccines. The Prime Minister, I mean, the setting was for this supply of vaccines and assistance during the COVID period had been made a long time back. I think some of us would recall that it was on the 17th of March 2020 when COVID had really, you know, the impact of COVID was hitting all of us. The Prime Minister took the initiative to convene a meeting of all the leaders of the SAARC area to deliberate on regional initiatives and a regional response to COVID-19. Very successful meeting in which we also decided to have a SAARC emergency response fund of $10 million. India contributed $10 million. All SAARC countries contributed based on their own abilities. And this fund has been very useful to us as we've supplied equipment, test kits, you know, PPEs, masks, and so on and so forth to all of our neighbors, and pharmaceutical products in the initial phases of this crisis. Subsequently, the Prime Minister also had a meeting of the health secretaries, or rather in the meeting of health secretaries of the SAARC region, which included both Mauritius and Seychelles. The Prime Minister provided the concluding address. And here again, I think it was an important way to exchange best practices, experiences that all of our countries have had. And a number of online training programs were also organized for health professionals in the SAARC countries. The last training program that we did was recent, just before the vaccine rollout, when we got people from all of our neighboring countries who manage cold chains, who are in charge of their immunization, vaccination programs, so that when they receive the vaccine, they're ready to go, they're already trained, that they have all the inputs necessary to make the best use of vaccines that we were providing. Now, the subject of today's discussion is what next for Neighbourhood First. To begin with, paraphrase, as I said, what the Prime Minister said, that Indian vaccines are a force for good in the neighbourhood. It is committed to improving the well-being of the region, and we haven't looked back since that time. We have been continuing our supplies beyond our neighbourhood into the Gulf region, into Africa, into Latin America, the Caribbean, And that has certainly not only helped a lot of the countries in stemming the challenge of COVID-19, but also I think many of them have been very, very grateful to us for sharing a very valuable resource, a scarce resource, even while we have our own domestic rollout of the vaccine. So, of course, it goes without saying that the growth, stability, and prosperity of those nearest to us is important to us because it helps us also. If we have a neighborhood that is in ferment, neighborhood that is not growing economically at the same level as we are bound to face the repercussions of that. But you invest in a neighborhood, you invest in their stability, security, prosperity, and growth, you get returns that are sometimes more than commensurate to your efforts. And I think this is the emphasis in our diplomacy today. And it also, from a certain point of view, receives the highest priority when we allocate funds, resources, and budgets in our ministry. In 2018, the Asian Development Bank, quoting the World Economic Forum, described the South Asian region as the world's fastest growing region. And the economic dimension of our Neighbourhood First policy is obviously critical. Greater economic integration within the region is known to produce a whole that is larger than the sum of its parts. And our policy in the region, therefore, lies in the greatest emphasis in augmenting connectivity. I think that has been one of our greatest priorities. We are not a region that is connected very well. Intra-SAARC trade is extremely low. What you need to do is to build connectivity, to build the infrastructure that can promote greater exchanges, economic exchanges between our countries. And that's been our endeavor in the last 6 or 7 years. Physical, economic, energy, digital, and cultural connectivity and building of this has been critical. We believe that amongst other things, this will induce a virtuous cycle in which connectivity and growth will feed on each other. And of course, that is good for everybody. People-to-people contacts have been critical in this effort. We have been working on shared challenges, security challenges, facing disasters together. The region is prone to natural disasters. Our work has moved into newer domains, the digital and cyber world, space, or civil nuclear energy. All of these areas are new areas, but cooperation in these areas are growing. And I think this is where new elements of our diplomacy have come into play. We work with our neighbors, not just bilaterally, but also in plurilateral and regional constructs. I mentioned SAARC, but BIMSTEC is a very important organization that brings together many of the countries of our region and is increasingly playing an important role in our endeavors to provide regional cohesion and cooperation in our endeavors. And of course, within our government, there has been a whole of government approach, increasing focus of the government on our neighborhood. And we have tried to mainstream neighborhood first in the work of all of our ministries. I think the cabinet secretary asked me, and I wrote a letter to all the secretaries saying that in whatever you do, please mainstream neighborhood first, look at what we can do with our neighborhood. And so when you talk about our policies in sabka saath, sabka vikas, it is not entirely too far-fetched to think that we are working in terms of our plans and programs to encompass our immediate neighborhood. When you talk about interactions, at the highest levels, I did mention 2014 when heads of state and government to the neighborhood states were part of the Prime Minister's swearing-in ceremony. But 13 bilateral visits have happened at the level heads and state and government with Bhutan since 2014. We've had 15 with Nepal. The other day when we were discussing Prime Minister's upcoming visit to Bangladesh, found that he had met Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina 10 times in the last 6 years. Incredible number of frequent meetings at the highest levels sets the tone and the momentum of our relationship. And this intensity has been maintained through the lockdown, through travel disruptions, the pandemic. We've had virtual meetings, summits with Sri Lanka and Bangladesh. Last year in February, the president of Myanmar visited us. And even within our own diplomatic interactions, External Affairs Minister visited Maldives. He went to Bangladesh. My first visit was to Afghanistan. I thought that was important from the perspective of the very strong geopolitical changes that are taking place in the region. But I also went twice to Bangladesh. I went to Myanmar. I went to Maldives. I went to Nepal. And most of my travels have been in our immediate neighborhood in this COVID period, where there was some very serious work to be done. Of course, as Mr. Godrej pointed out, this does not mean that it's without its challenges. He called it clouds, and I think that is something that we cannot entirely overlook. We do desire good neighborly relations with our western neighbor, which is Pakistan. We are committed to addressing issues, if any, bilaterally with it and peacefully. However, any meaningful dialogue can only be held in a conducive environment, and the onus is on Pakistan to create such an environment free of terror and free of support for the infrastructure of terrorism. I mentioned Afghanistan. We follow closely developments related to the Afghanistan peace process. The External Affairs Minister participated at the opening of the intra-Afghan negotiations in September 2020 in Doha. We are part of several regional efforts, and over the next few days, you will see a number of initiatives in which we are a part relating to Afghanistan. This is a very important part of our neighborhood. The implications of any changes in that area come directly upon us, and so we have every interest in ensuring that we are a part and parcel of the decision-making as it involves Afghanistan. Recent developments in Myanmar have been much in the news and is a matter of deep concern to us. We have invested very heavily in the transition of that country to democracy and over the last decade, and we believe that this process should not be undermined. We have always been steadfast in our support to the process of democracy and for Myanmar to emerge as a stable democratic federal union. Our developmental and humanitarian efforts in Myanmar have been aimed at the socio-economic development of the country. And we need to continue with these efforts in the interest of the people of Myanmar. And of course, it's important as an immediate neighbor that has a 1,700-kilometer border with Myanmar, that the people of that country should not suffer as a consequence of the efforts that are being made. We will, of course, continue to monitor the situation carefully, remain in touch with all concerned and like-minded countries. We are we are members of the UN Security Council, and we do try to take a constructive role in reaching balanced outcomes of the Council on Myanmar. Now, of course, when we talk about growth in the neighborhood, I referred to high growth rates in South Asia. These are also due to now increasingly upgraded infrastructure, especially in India, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka. In Bangladesh alone, since I was there, we have invested close to $10 billion in infrastructure development. And I think the results are there for many of us to see. Of course, more on that as I mention specifics. When you come down to infrastructure development, ports is very important. We have invested in the Chabahar port in Iran. We have now activated the international north-south corridor, which will use the Chabahar port to provide a corridor for goods to Central Asia and beyond. The Zaranj-Delaram highway improves connectivity to landlocked Afghanistan, links South Asia to Central Asia, as I mentioned. Landlocked Bhutan has accessed through Indian waterways and improved road networks to Bangladesh and the Bay of Bengal. India and Bangladesh, of course, are interlinked by a network of rivers. We share a coastline. 10 years ago, transit was a complicated issue in Bangladesh. Today, Indian goods can now reach Tripura from West Bengal through waterways via Ashuganj in Bangladesh, or the coastal route via Chittagong and Mongla ports. We are engaged in the operationalization of that particular transit through Chittagong and Mongla ports. And a direct cargo ferry connectivity between India and Maldives has proved very popular and has reduced costs in the Maldives. Another transport corridor that we are creating is the Kaladan multi-purpose transport highway, which connects the northeast to the sea through Myanmar, through the Rakhine state into the port of Sitwe, which we have again developed and constructed. We've constructed the riverine port in Paleva, and we are today engaged in constructing the road that links Zorinpui in Mizoram to the Paleva port. I think when that comes through, that will be a very important point of connectivity. And the trilateral highway, which connects India to Southeast Asia through Myanmar is also well on its way to completion. I think all these projects started slow, had a lot of difficulties, most of which were not within our control. But today, I think we are optimistic that we are on the right track to seeing them reach their logical conclusion. Railways has been a very important means of connecting our countries. They're causing a rapid shrinking of South Asia's geography, and we have made a sustained effort with Bangladesh, for example, to leverage historical railway connections into a contemporary network. There were 6 rail connections that existed between India and Bangladesh before 1965, before the war broke those connections. Today, I'm happy to say that 5 out of the 6 connections have been restored. The 6th will be restored next year. We also have 2 new connections that are being forged through the Akhoda-Agartala rail line and through the Feni Sabroom line. All of these, I think, will do wonders for our connectivity. I do recall myself that the latest point of connection between the railway connectivity between India and Bangladesh is Chilahati-Haldibadi, which was the route taken by the Darjeeling Mail in the earlier days to access North Bengal, Siliguri. And today that route is open and is again opens up huge possibilities in terms of reducing transportation time and costs for all of us. In Nepal, we have connected through the new Jayanagar-Kurtha railway line, our Raxaul-Kathmandu railway line, which is really a line between India, a rail line right from India, from our border to Kathmandu, is something that is at a fairly advanced stage of preparation. Railways, of course, have a lower carbon footprint and are much more economical in moving goods. I must say that even during the COVID lockdown period, we could send containerized cargoes to Bangladesh. You had trains leaving from Nasik going straight to Dhaka, and that really created wonders in terms of not only sorting out some of the supply constraints, but also in reducing costs. And that, I think, precedence has created an opportunity for us, which we are now forging forward on. There are, of course, passenger services extensively between Bangladesh and India, and our plans, we plan to replicate that in our entire neighborhood and beyond, because if you look at the trilateral highway which connects to Myanmar and Thailand, the idea is to take it now to Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam. Railways that link India and Myanmar would further link us to the Asian railway network to Thailand, Laos, Cambodia, Singapore, and Vietnam. These are all in the realm of possibility. A network of land ports, integrated checkposts are being built on our land borders to upgrade the cargo transshipment, passenger transit experience. Air connectivity has improved significantly. Direct flight connections between Guwahati and Bangkok, Guwahati and Dhaka have been initiated, and connects our northeast very effectively. Even Bagdogra is connected to Bangkok, for example. Chennai Jaffna Air Link has been created. Maldives is connected by air. In the normal course, of course, Sri Lanka as well. So air connectivity is really something that's coming up, and there are new links which are being developed. More people are moving in our neighborhood than ever before. One of the areas that we focus on is making people-to-people contact easier, traveler people more, to facilitate easier access to people into each other's countries. My own experience there has been, quite interesting, because when I went into Bangladesh, I found that we were giving 5 lakh visas in a year. Clearly, this was far below the demand. The demand was significantly higher. Nobody could tell me exactly what the demand was. But when we opened up the visa space, we found that the demand was actually 3 times higher. Today, we issue 16 lakh visas a year from Bangladesh. And the Ministry of Tourism calculated that revenue from tourism alone to this stream could be into the billions of dollars at a very conservative estimate. What I'm saying is that all of this has great spin-off benefits, and besides the fact that people come in for shopping, for tourism, for recreation, for medical purposes, what is important is that people get to know each other, that we are not as alien as it seems within our own neighborhood, and that people-to-people contact is, I think, the most important connect in South Asia that we have, and we need to do more to be able to, take that forward. energy is an important part of our economic exchanges. We want to work with the sub-regional connectivity, Bhutan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Myanmar, India. Energy like goods, services, and people needs to flow freely in the region and beyond. We are promoting easier movement of hydrocarbons, for example. We've already had cross-border pipelines which link India and Nepal via Motihari and Amlekganj. We are constructing another pipeline between Siliguri and Jhapa. We are also in the final process of constructing a pipeline between Siliguri and Parbatipur in Bangladesh for high-speed diesel. I mentioned connectivity for goods through Bangladesh, but we have now also got access for supplying bulk LPG between India and Bangladesh, and then from Bangladesh to our northeastern states. We are looking at linking, interconnecting our LNG grids, and so the scope in the energy sector is huge from that perspective. Electricity, power exchanges are a very, very important part of the economic connectivity between our countries. Grid interconnection is the foundation of any meaningful cooperation in this sector. Our grid is connected to Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh through high-capacity connections. Yes, and these are being augmented. We are looking, at a 765 kV line that will link our northeastern states and which will enable us to evacuate surplus power from northeast through Bangladesh into the rest of India. We are also looking at the possibility of an undersea cable connection that would provide grid interconnectivity with Sri Lanka. New technologies have made this more both economically feasible and viable. So the scope for the power trade and power cooperation is enormous, and with the notification of our procedures for the export and import of electricity with our neighboring countries, which the Ministry of Power has just done, I think this power trade, supply of power from one country to the other in our neighborhood becomes a reality. And it opens up a vast power trading market to our neighbors. Of course, our hydroelectric cooperation with Bhutan is well known. We have created 2,000 megawatts of hydropower capacity in Bhutan, and there is much more which is on the process of being created. We are also constructing a 1320 megawatt super thermal power plant in Bangladesh. So there's a lot happening. In Nepal, of course, there are a number of hydroelectric projects. From the Upper Karnali to the Arun and Lower Arun projects. Many of these projects actually would provide surplus power, to Nepal, and then beyond Nepal to India, and then even to Bangladesh. So the scope is enormous there. And of course, when we talk about power, we have to talk about renewable energy. I think we spoke, Mr. Godrej and I spoke a short while ago about climate change and what we need to do to mitigate the impact of climate change. Here, our cooperation with our neighbors in ensuring that they have access, they develop the capacity for renewable energy is something that we are working on. And the Indian power sector itself is on the cusp of a solar powered revolution, as we call it, and that this clean energy momentum will enable us to outperform our Paris commitments. And our Neighbourhood First policy is adjusting to this emphasis on cleaner energy. We are working on wind energy projects with Myanmar and Sri Lanka. We have offered a $100 million line of credit for solar power projects in Sri Lanka. We are also working on the distribution of solar power in 5 townships in the Rakhine state in Myanmar. So this is something that I think we are working on very significantly. When we talk about development, we also talk about creating capacities in areas that contribute to and improve the lives of the people of those countries, whether it's hospitals in Sri Lanka, Maldives, Nepal, Afghanistan, Myanmar, ambulance project in Sri Lanka, or institutes of higher learning in Myanmar and other countries. After the tsunami, after the major, I would say, earthquake in Nepal, we contributed greatly to the development in a number of areas: housing, education, culture. I must say that out of the 50,000 houses that we committed to construct in areas devastated by the earthquake in Nepal, we have, I think, done about 48,000, which is quite remarkable in a matter of a few years. We've reconstructed schools that were destroyed. We've constructed, hospitals that were destroyed. And more important is that we have engaged in the restoration and the preservation of the cultural heritage of Nepal, which was in many places badly affected by the earthquake. So our effort is to invest in the well-being of our neighbors and their capacities, support the creation of institutions, the building of the parliament in Afghanistan, the Supreme Court in Mauritius, or the metro project in Mauritius are good examples of how we are facilitating that effort. We are the education hub of the neighborhood. Tens of thousands of students from our neighboring countries study in India at any given time. I myself have seen education fairs in our neighboring countries, which are very popular. You have thousands of students and their parents coming, actually enrolling into schools and colleges on the spot. And it's amazing, how much new capacity we have created in India in private sector schooling and, university level education, which is of international standards and which is attracting students from not just our immediate neighborhood, but also our extended neighborhoods. Because when I was in Thailand, I saw a lot of that also. We've become a hub for healthcare in the neighborhood, and I would say that the scope of carrying that forward is enormous. This is something that at the commercial level, the creation of capacity, medical capacity that can cater to our neighborhood is I think far from meeting its full potential. There are specific programs that are designed for certain areas. The border areas development program in Myanmar enables us to contribute to the development of areas that are just across our borders in Myanmar. There are similar ethnicities on both sides. Contributing to their development is important. We also have the Rakhine State Development Program that seeks to improve the socioeconomic conditions of the Rakhine State and thereby lessen the possibilities of conflict in that area. Technology is important. We are looking at capacity building programs that would push the development of technology and learning. Telelearning, telemedicines are some of the things that we are doing. And so the scope in all of what we are doing is enormous. Humanitarian assistance and HADR operations in our neighboring countries we have been the first responder, in many senses a net security provider for much of our neighborhood. And this is, I think, an important factor in our contribution to the concept of a free, open, inclusive Indo-Pacific region. Also, it starts with our neighborhood in dealing with traditional and non-traditional threats. Well, I mean, when we look at the pandemic and the fact that we live in an age of the unprecedented, in a time of the unexpected, in an era of disruptions, I think it's important that our policy towards our neighbors also should be to adjust and, if possible, leverage disruptions. And we can do so if we continue to build on firm foundations of goodwill and good intentions that underlie our policy. Just a quick word before I conclude on how we see the future, and I think I'm sure there's scope to talk more on that in the Q&A that we have. Our resources and capacities will be used for human development, for sustainable development, for meeting climate goals. In doing so, of course, government is an important factor, but we also have to look beyond governments. We should encourage our dynamic private sector to seek opportunity, facilitate in their doing so, facilitate them in their doing so, and this would certainly add greater economic heft and substance to equations. We must encourage cooperation between civil society, and the involvement of both the private sector and civil society would help us build our strengths as a source of healthcare, education, capacities, content, and of ideas. We have a shared cultural heritage, preservation of this cultural heritage and landmarks and temples in Sri Lanka and Myanmar, monuments in Bangladesh and Nepal is an area where we can work together. In the Ministry of External Affairs, we have opened a new division that focuses on cultural heritage. We have got expertise from the archaeological survey, from intact, many different areas that can contribute to a better understanding where we can help in cultural heritage, use our existing expertise and skills in that regard. New technologies, we're talking about the Aadhaar-based JAM, Ayushman Bharat, Jal Jeevan Mission, the UPI digital payment system, others that have promoted digital and financial inclusion. This has a wide resonance in our neighborhood. We've just introduced the RuPay card in Bhutan. We're extending it to other countries in our neighborhood. We look at investing in technology as a bridge. The South Asia Satellite, the first of its kind initiative, was launched in May 2017. We're working with Russia on a unique civil nuclear cooperation program in Bangladesh. I've referred to renewable energy. As our demographics and economies transition, we must continue to remain forward-looking, demand-driven, flexible, whether it is the blue economy or digital space, whether it's maritime cooperation or logistics sector, whether it is joint degree program, joint research, or joint projects or joint campuses, we will remain for the opportunities that they provide. We must explore interactions with our Act East and Indo-Pacific facing Sagar initiatives. I'm certain that we will, by building on the momentum of the existing interaction and by working on new areas of cooperation, create a more integrated, better interlinked and prosperous neighborhood. I thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shringla. That was a real tour de force of the region, which covered politics, it covered economic opportunity, it covered the type of issues that we have dealt with and supported our neighbors. It is really quite remarkable as to how far we have come. And I do hope that this only gets wider and deeper. Let me start with one question, which is probably very topical for you today, which is that our Prime Minister, as you correctly mentioned, has had interaction with the Prime Minister in Bangladesh on many occasions in the last few years. And of course, we understand that he will be visiting Bangladesh very soon. And so I was just wondering, what would be uppermost in the mind of the Prime Minister, our Prime Minister and the Prime Minister of Bangladesh when they meet?
That's an important question, although I must preface my answer by saying that we have not made an official announcement of the Prime Minister's visit. So I will respond to your question hypothetically. The Prime Minister, if he visits Bangladesh, as you say, in later this month, will be doing so at the invitation of Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. It will be on a very, very important occasion. It's the 50th anniversary of India-Bangladesh relations. It is the 50th anniversary of the Bangladesh war, in which we were jointly, our soldiers and Bangladeshi soldiers shed blood together. It's unique in the annals of history. It is also the 100th anniversary of birth anniversary of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, what is called Mujib Borsho. Those celebrations continue. It's very, very significant. Just a day before the Prime Minister reaches is when Bangladesh celebrates this Genocide Day, a day on which they mark the fact that up to 3 million Bangladeshis were killed by Pakistani occupation forces in 1971 in the most brutal manner. And I think these, if you look at all of this, this is a historic connect between our countries. It connects the people of our countries, and it is an indelible bond in the annals of history between our two countries. So this is an important occasion. The Prime Minister is the only guest on the occasion, so it is just him and Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina who will conduct the proceedings that mark these very, very important milestones in the history of both our countries. Besides that, of course, the focus, they've had a summit recently. It is not so much about deliverables, it's about addressing the people of both our countries. It's really relating to a bond that is there in the past, but a bond that continues to unite us today in the form of what I mentioned. in the form of connectivity, in the form of economic development, in the form of people-to-people contacts. And I think that is the bond that we are going to focus on, and we were going to also look at what we can do in the future. So today, relations between India and Bangladesh have come a long way from a relationship that went through its ups and downs after 1971. After 1975, the assassination of Sheikh Mujibur Rahman did create a void, did lead to certain elements coming in that were inimical to our interests. And ultimately, I think we have found our way back. And today, I think the relationship is really quite extraordinary, very close, very mutually beneficial. There is a deep amount of respect for each other. There is also a sense that whatever we do has to be in the interest of both our countries. The fact that the largest chunk of our development assistance and development partnership has gone to Bangladesh, close to $10 billion, is not entirely a coincidence. I think it is one of our largest and most important partners. And of course, as a country with 160, 170 million people, it is, and also a country that is geographically located in a very important position as far as we are concerned, in the Bay of Bengal. It straddles both the northeastern part and parts of eastern India. And I think the fact that today we are looking at a partnership, at a friendship that is unique, illustrates, it takes us back to the spirit of 1971, when our two countries were joined together in amity and cooperation, and the joint resolve to free Bangladesh from tyranny and oppression. And in today's context, I think we have to take that spirit even more forward. And that is, I think, the main, symbolism of the visit of the Prime Minister. And of course, I'm sure there'll be a lot more to it, but we will see as we get up on the run-up to the visit.
Yeah, no, that was very useful. I entirely agree with you that this is a really very important relationship, and building on that is crucial for our neighborhood. I think you have, in your address, talked a lot about the importance of our maritime boundaries and outreach. And we don't always look at India as a maritime nation, but it is, even from a historical point of view. And it's wonderful to see that, we are making huge efforts to reach out on our maritime borders, especially to Mauritius, to Seychelles, to Maldives, to Sri Lanka, of course, much closer to India. And this is really a very important relationship, not just economically, but also from a strategic point. And we welcome this initiative. Do you feel that there is something that more that we can do both from an industry and a business point of view, and also from a tourism point of view, so that these countries can come much closer together?
Well, if you look at the Prime Minister's vision of Sagar, or security and growth for all in the region, he really is referring to the Indian Ocean region and our maritime connect. And I think there has been a conscious policy to try and develop links with our maritime neighbors on the lines that you mentioned. We, in the Ministry of External Affairs, have consciously created an Indian Ocean region division that focuses on our relations with Sri Lanka, Maldives, Mauritius, Seychelles, Comoros, Madagascar, the entire chain of Western Indian Ocean islands with which we have a very solid bond that connects us historically and in today's context. And what does this mean, and what does this do for us? For example, take a recent example of COVID. When COVID struck, many of our friends in the Western Indian Ocean came to us and said, look, we have no capacity and no knowledge of how to handle this. Please help us in dealing with this crisis. And we immediately send out what are called rapid response teams to all of these countries to enable them to at least get the expertise and the basics in dealing with. How do you deal with it? What are the health procedures? What are the protocols? What do you need to do? How do you need to quarantine people? All of this was provided. In addition to which, naval ships took a mission. One was Operation Sanjeevani, which carried 62 tons of food assistance to Maldives because they had a crisis on their hands. The entire economy was on lockdown. Tourism, which contributed a bulk of the revenue of that country, had closed down completely. We also mounted a special operation to Seychelles, Mauritius, Seychelles, and Comoros to provide them with medicines, with food aid, and with the skills, with training and capacity building to handle the COVID crisis. So not only our naval ships, but also doctors that went with the ships went and helped these countries. So, I mean, I just gave you the example in trying to illustrate how India comes across, as a first responder, as a net security provider. And by security, I just don't mean security as in defense and terms of protecting yourself, but health security, food security, security that all of these countries really look to. We are today developing. You saw that we signed an agreement to develop the assumption of a port in what is called UTF, Uttara Filahalu port in the Maldives. We are developing a port, the Agalega port in Mauritius. We are talking to the Seychelles, and in all of these countries, we are developing long-term assets which are part of our cooperation with these countries, close cooperation with these countries. I mentioned the metro in Mauritius, the Supreme Court building in Mauritius. We are constructing similar facilities in the Seychelles, and of course much more that we are doing. We are involved in the Greater Malay Connectivity Project in the Maldives. I think these projects that we are undertaking would be huge in nature, involve significant investments. It would open up a lot of opportunities for our companies to go in and participate in these huge infrastructure projects. It would also provide much spin-off benefits, and also help those countries develop capacity and come up with their own means of catering to many of these projects that are ongoing. But I think tourism, you mentioned, is a very important part of the livelihood of all these countries, from Sri Lanka, all the island countries that we mentioned. A good number of tourists to Sri Lanka, to the Maldives, to Mauritius are from India. That can further be developed. Maldives is the first to open a travel bubble with us, as a result of which today I think about 60% of all tourists to the Maldives are from India. And it's an incredible, success story from the point of view of resuscitating the tourism economy, because you have, the possibility of a large number of Indian tourists going and taking up capacity in tourism terms in the Maldives at a time when COVID is still very much prevalent. We can do that even beyond, in the Seychelles and Comoros as we go along. So it's important that we come across with our neighbors in the Western Indian Ocean as friends, as those who are there to assist them in times of need. It's a long-term partnership in which we are looking at a long-term relationship of friendship and amity, and that is our endeavor. And I think it has worked very well. There's a great appreciation of what we have done. We have earned a lot of goodwill, but at the same time, we will continue to develop synergies that will stimulate our respective economies, provide opportunities, the sorts you mentioned, and create long-term, I would say, mutualities for our countries.
Yes. No. I think, Mr. Shringla, this is really a fantastic story. And I think the more we do with our neighbors on our maritime borders, clearly would be beneficial for everyone. You have also mentioned the fact that we were the first to respond to give help on COVID, whether it was testing or getting to some basic issues. But the vaccine now has, as you rightly mentioned, been given to our neighbors, given to many countries around the world. And the experts are saying that pandemics are here to stay. And to some extent, we don't know exactly what the next one's going to be, but could be variations of the present one or something else. I was just wondering whether we should have a greater and a tighter cooperation on vaccine development and distribution, and everything around vaccines, but also then extended, of course, to healthcare, as you rightly mentioned in your, this could be a great area for India to win the hearts and minds of all our neighbors.
But that's very, very important point because it takes me back to the period of, say, around February, March last year, when this crisis struck, and we found that we were not only very short of critical health equipment, PPEs, masks, test kits, ventilators, but also the raw materials that went into making these. I mean, a lot of them were available in India, but certain critical ingredients had to be, sourced from one country or the other, and that put us into, a bit of a tight spot in the initial phases. But then, the resilience of the Indian industry came into play, and we ramped up our production in all of these areas. And happily, today we are looking at surplus capacities which we are able to export. Today, we're exporting PPEs, test kits, masks. We had, when the crisis struck, 14,000 ventilators in hospitals all over India. We're looking at increasing this to 35 lakhs in the country. I mean, in a certain sense, it's an opportunity. For us, COVID represented, a crisis, and in meeting that challenge, an opportunity that we have ramped up to such an extent that today we have become an important part of the supply chain of health equipment. When we talk about medicines, hydroxychloroquine, paracetamol, we talk about vaccines, Indian-made vaccines. It is important that we increase our cooperation, collaboration. We have worked with our neighbors. I mean, there was a proposal to have efficacy trials in Bangladesh and Myanmar. We're also working on joint genomic research with these countries on producing vaccines. Clearly, I think as we go along, we will have to do more in terms of in cooperation with our neighborhood. That is why I think 2 meetings at the SARC level and the regional level at the Prime Minister's level were important, because what we're trying to do is to understand what are best practices, what are the lessons learned, what our countries need, and what we can do to fill those gaps. Just digressing from that, what we just achieved with the Quad the other day, last Friday, when the Quad met at the summit level for the first time, was that we had a very unusual cooperation in the vaccine sector, where US vaccines would be manufactured in India using our made in India capacities to export to Southeast Asia and the Indo-Pacific with funds from the US and Japan and Australia. That's a fantastic area of collaboration. I mean, that's a win-win for all of our countries. And the Quad then, has a positive agenda in the Indo-Pacific outreach that it's trying to do. We need to see how we can co-opt our neighborhood in these endeavors. How can we work together with our neighboring countries, our friends and partners in the neighborhood, not only to supply vaccines, but to develop vaccines, to work with them in future vaccine capacities. Now, coming back again, when we talk about additional capacities, the Quad is not looking at using our capacities today, which we are using for our own citizens. It is creating additional capacities that will, and funding additional capacities that will be used to supply. Similarly, we need to create additional capacities that can supply not just our neighborhood, but the entire world. I mean, you mentioned another crisis, another pandemic. This is not going to be the last pandemic. I think we will have more such major health crises in the future. We must be prepared for it. We must be prepared in terms of a global, health intergovernmental mechanism. The WHO clearly was not mandated. It was not up to the task. We need to do more to address that issue. We need to create capacities in all of these areas that we need to, prepare ourselves for the next pandemic. And we need to co-opt our neighborhood in that effort. And how we do it is something that we will have to work on. But that idea certainly, and that vision is an important one, and I think is already in play in our system.
I have many questions that have come from our audiences. The one on vaccines was also from the audience. And unfortunately, I don't think we have too much more time, but there are questions to do with Myanmar. What can we do under the present circumstances? You did talk in your address on that. There are questions about the ceasefire along the line of control and the border with Pakistan. There are questions about the future of BIMSTEC, and there are there are questions about how we can continue to cooperate, as you rightly mentioned, on rivers. And so I think there are many, many such questions, and I don't know if we can do time and justice to all of them. But if any of these, would you like to comment on?
And all very relevant questions, I must say, for those who are with us in this session. Myanmar is, a very complex situation. Not the least of it is because we are immediate neighbors of Myanmar. I mean, as I said, we share a 1,700-kilometer border. There are strong community linkages, between people who live on our side and those who live across the border. Needless to say, what happens in Myanmar does impact on us one way or the other. We, as a strong democracy, have been very, very proactive in assisting and facilitating the process of Myanmar's democratic transition. And so obviously, the developments, the recent developments have been somewhat of a setback and somewhat of a concern for us. What is important is that we need to work in a constructive manner to ensure that we ultimately meet our objective of restoring democracy. But at the same time, we need to ensure that we do it without in any way impacting on the well-being and welfare of the people of Myanmar. In other words, we cannot adopt tactics that would be seem reasonable if you're far away and if you're not from the region. For example, imposition of sanctions that can impact on the food security or availability of goods or the prices and contribute to inflation in Myanmar. We undertake several humanitarian projects that are important for the people of Myanmar. We intend to continue with those. But at the same time, we are happy to play our role in facilitating, a resolution of the issue as it unfolds, as situation becomes clearer, working with all concerned. At this point of time, all we can hope for is that, and express the hope that violence should be avoided in any way. That the issues that involve parties should be resolved peacefully, and that we need to use our good offices, and we've had good links with all concerned in Myanmar to work with all sides, which we are doing. We are in open conversation with all concerned in trying to facilitate and address the situation to the best of our ability. But we as a democracy and a neighbor of Myanmar's have a slightly different take from those who might be looking at it from elsewhere. We are certainly conscious of the need to do it in a manner that is keeping in mind the sensitivities concerned, keeping in mind the requirements of all concerned, and of course to ensure that our own relationship with that country remains on an even keel, and that what we do does not impact on people of both our countries. That's very important. Well, that's Myanmar. I mean, there are no simple answers to what is a complicated situation, but we will have to be alert and vigilant, and keep calibrating our responses as we go along. The ceasefire that was announced by the Directors General of Military Operations between both our countries, of course, I must say, is a welcome development. And nobody wants a situation of a violation of ceasefires. That has been the norm for many years now. I think if the ceasefire holds, and if there is seriousness of not allowing terrorism across our borders, this is a good sign. But of course, as I said, the onus lies on Pakistan to ensure that its interests are not, its actions are not inimical to our interests. BIMSTEC, as I mentioned, is an important organization of which we support this greatly. We're looking forward to this next BIMSTEC summit in Sri Lanka, which we believe can take forward that cooperation significantly. We've been working quite hard with our neighbors to promote regional cooperation through BIMSTEC in terms of trade, in terms of investments, counterterrorism, vehicle movement. So there is a great deal of I would say, positive developments on the BIMSTEC side. And BIMSTEC is also quite unique because it straddles South and Southeast Asia, because Myanmar and Thailand are also members of BIMSTEC, as are most South Asian countries. And I think this is a construct that would be very valuable in fostering regional and inter-regional cooperation in our neighborhood. Rivers, of course, the lifeblood of all of our countries flow from our neighbors from the west to the north to the east. And I think, managing rivers and, looking at it and as an integrated whole, the concept of river-wide basin management, these are important concepts. And how do we do it? How do we deal with the fact that India is both an upper riparian and a lower riparian? How do we deal with issues that involve the activities of our upper riparians at the same time? The concerns of our lower riparians is something that we need to work on. And of course, rivers, water and flow of water are sensitive subjects. We have seen the sensitivity with regard to Bangladesh, on the river sharing arrangements. If you look at the Ganges water sharing agreement signed in 1996, that is today still holding good. I mean, it is an agreement that has served the interest of both our countries very, very admirably. We are looking at a number of other rivers on which we can have similar water sharing arrangements with Bangladesh. Again, it is delicate because when you're an upper riparian, if there are floods, then there is a propensity to think that the upper riparian is involved. If there is a drought, then you feel that the upper riparian is withholding water. These are not easy situations to deal with, but the more cooperation we have and the more arrangements we have, institutional mechanisms between our two sides to cooperate on water, not just with our lower riparians, but also with our upper riparians. I think our lower riparians also have to understand that we have a common cause when it comes to our upper riparians, that there are issues, the building of large dams, the diversion of water, the proposals to use water in different ways, which could impact on the interests, directly on the interests and livelihoods of the lower riparians, are things that are of great concern. And I think we need to address some of those issues. I think hydro, tapping of hydropower potential, success that we have had in inland waterways transportation with Bangladesh and with our other neighbors, including Bhutan, Nepal, these are success stories. If you look at our Jal Vikas Marg, which is the development of our inland waterways, we realized that if you are able to dredge two significant waterways in Bangladesh between two segments, you will be able to take riverine transportation all the way from Guwahati to Varanasi and vice versa. It opens up national waterways 1 and 2 for us. And in doing so, it helps our neighboring countries. So this Indian waterways is a huge area of potential cooperation. Hydroelectric power is something that we have harnessed for the benefit of our region. I talked about power trade, which is going to be the future, where power is fungible, where power can be shared, bought, sold. I think this is something that our neighborhood would greatly appreciate. And if we have great interconnectivity in every possible way, I think we would have really achieved regional integration of a kind that we would only have dreamed of 10 years or 20 years ago. So times are changing, and I think much of what we have discussed is looking at a futuristic idea. But for that, we need to continue on this policy of building connectivity, of investing in the development, socioeconomic development of our neighbors, and of course in investing in people-to-people ties and real good relations between the peoples of our countries, not just the leadership of our countries. It's important, but you need to build also on the people level ties.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Foreign Secretary, Mr. Shringla. Really appreciate the wide depth of issues that we have covered today. And clearly, there's such great opportunity for us to get much deeper in every area with our neighbors. And thank you very much on behalf of all of those who are listening in today, on behalf of the Ananta Center and the Ananta Aspen Center. And on my own behalf, thank you extremely for being with us here and giving us the benefit of your knowledge and discourse. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you very much. Greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.